What happens when the man who promised to protect you becomes the architect of your destruction? For Clara Hayes, her fairy tale life shattered the moment the courtroom doors slammed shut. She was pregnant, innocent, and sentenced to prison for a crime she didn't commit. The accuser. Her billionaire husband, Damien Blackwood, convinced she had stolen a priceless heirloom. But the real thief was hiding in plain sight, a venomous mistress who framed her perfectly. This is the story of a devastating betrayal, a mother's fight for survival, and a husband's confession that came far, far too late. The penthouse apartment felt less like a home and more like a pristine museum exhibit floating above the New York City skyline. Every surface was polished to a mirror shine. Every piece of art was worth more than the average person's lifetime earnings, and every window offered a breathtaking, godlike view of the world below. This was Clara Hayes's life, now a life she had stepped into when she married Damien Blackwood, the technology billionaire whose name was synonymous with innovation and ruthless success. At 28, Clara, a talented architect with a spirit far gentler than the cutthroat world she now inhabited, often felt like another beautiful acquisition. She loved Damien, or at least she loved the man she saw in their quiet moments, the man who would trace the curve of her growing belly with a look of genuine wonder, whispering plans for their son. But that man was often eclipsed by the titan of industry, the Damien Blackwood who commanded boardrooms and whose time was measured in millions of dollars per minute. His most trusted lieutenant in all things was Isabella Ricci. She was his executive assistant, but the title was a gross understatement. Isabella was Damien's shadow, his gatekeeper, his external hard drive. She was sleek, intelligent, and possessed an ambition that burned with the intensity of a blue flame. She had been with Damien for years, long before Clara, and she made no secret of her belief that she understood him in ways a wife never could. Clara's unease around Isabella was a constant low-grade hum. It was in the way Isabella would enter their private residence without knocking a file in hand, her eyes flicking over Clara with a dismissive coolness. It was in the inside jokes she shared with Damien, references to deals and trips that predated Clara's existence. Clara told herself it was her own insecurity, the lingering ghost of her middle-class upbringing, rattling around in this palace of glass and steel. The source of the impending storm, though she didn't know it yet, was locked away in Damien's private safe. It was a necklace known as the Star of Astoria, a staggering deep blue sapphire the size of a robin's egg, suspended in a web of antique platinum and diamonds. It had belonged to his mother, a woman Damien spoke of with a reverence that bordered on worship. One evening a few weeks before the annual Blackwood Foundation charity gala, which was to be held at their penthouse, Damien opened the safe. "I want you to wear it for the gala," he said, his voice soft as he lifted the heavy jewel from its velvet bed. Clara gasped. The necklace was cold and heavy in her palm, radiating a history and value that was terrifying. "Damien, I can't. It's a legend. What if something happens to it?" "Nothing will happen to it," he said, his confidence absolute. He fastened it around her neck, his fingers cool against her skin. In the mirror, the sapphire seemed to swallow the light in the room. Its blue depths a stark contrast to her simple white dress and the warm glow of her pregnancy. "It belongs on you now. You are the lady of this house." Isabella, entering with a schedule update, paused at the doorway. Her eyes locked onto the necklace, and for a fleeting second, Clara saw something raw and unguarded in her gaze, a flash of pure, unadulterated envy. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a tight, professional smile. "Stunning Clara Isabella," said her voice, smooth as silk. "A queen's jewel. You'll be the talk of the gala." The night of the gala was a dizzying blur of camera flashes, champagne flutes, and the hollow laughter of the city's elite. Clara, feeling large and clumsy in her bespoke maternity gown, wore the star of Astoria with a paralyzing sense of dread. She felt the weight of it, not just as a jewel, but as a symbol of Damien's trust. She took it off the moment they were alone, her fingers trembling slightly as she handed it back to him. "It was beautiful, but I'm terrified of it," she confessed with a nervous laugh. Damien smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that made her heart ache. "You were the beautiful one." He placed the necklace back in its case, spun the dial on the safe, and patted the steel door. Safe and sound. 2 days later, the world ended. It began with a frantic search. A potential buyer a sheikh Damien had been courting for a new international venture was in town, and had expressed interest in seeing the famous sapphire. It was a power play, a display of legacy. Damien, wanting to close the deal, went to the safe. He came out moments later, his face pale, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Clara." "Where is it?" "Where is what?" she asked, looking up from the nursery blueprints she was reviewing. "Don't play games." "The necklace. The Star of Astoria. It's not in the safe." A cold fear, sharp and immediate, pierced through her. "What? That's impossible. You put it back. I saw you." They searched the study together, a frantic, useless exercise. It wasn't there. Damien's controlled panic was escalating into something uglier. That's when Isabella appeared, her expression a perfect mask of concern. "Damien? What's wrong?" she asked, rushing to his side. "The necklace is gone," he bit out, running a hand through his hair. "It's been stolen." Isabella's eyes widened. She put a comforting hand on his arm, a gesture of familiarity that grated on Clara's nerves. "Stolen, but how?" "The security here is—" She trailed off. Then her eyes shifted as if a sudden terrible thought had occurred to her. "Oh, Damien." "No." "What is it?" he demanded. "It's probably nothing," Isabella said, hesitating for dramatic effect. "But the other day, I was looking for a swatch book in Clara's studio. I saw a box. I didn't think anything of it, but—" She didn't need to finish. The implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Damien's gaze swung to Clara, his eyes hardening with a suspicion that was like a physical blow. "My studio." Clara was bewildered. "What are you talking about?" Without another word. Damien strode down the hall to the small, sunlit room Clara used for her architectural work. She followed her heart, hammering against her ribs. Isabella trailed behind them, a silent, watchful presence. Damien tore through the room, his usual precision gone replaced by a desperate fury. He ripped open closets' drawers, portfolio cases, and then tucked away in a shoebox on the top shelf of a closet where she kept old sketches he found it. He pulled out a necklace. For a split second, relief washed over Clara until she saw it properly. It was a crude imitation. The sapphire was glass, the diamonds were chips of zirconia, and the platinum was cheap plated metal. It was a gaudy, worthless replica of the Star of Astoria. Damien held it up. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by Clara's ragged breathing. "What is this, Clara?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I've never seen that before in my life," she stammered, her mind reeling. How did it get there? Who-would her eyes shot to Isabella. Isabella met her gaze, and for the first time there was no mask. There was only triumph. You planned to replace it, Damien said, his voice flat with dawning horror and conviction. You took the real one and left this piece of trash, hoping I wouldn't notice for months, years even. No, Damien. Listen to me, Clara pleaded, taking a step toward him. I would never. Someone put that there. It was her. She pointed a shaking finger at Isabella. Isabella flinched back, a masterful performance of being wounded. Me? Clara, why would you say that? I'm just trying to help. She's always been jealous. She wants what we have. Clara's voice was rising, becoming hysterical, and she knew, even as the words tumbled out, that it was making her look guiltier. Damien's face was like stone. The love, the trust. The man who had looked at their unborn child with such wonder. It was all gone. In his place stood a judge, a jury, and an executioner, all convinced of her guilt. He saw his wife, the woman from a modest background, pregnant, and perhaps he now reasoned desperate to secure a future for herself in case things went wrong. He saw the worthless replica and the priceless original that was missing. He saw a betrayal of his mother's memory. I don't know who you are anymore, he said, his voice cracking with the agony of his own conclusion. He turned to Isabella. Call the police. The arrival of the New York Police Department detectives turned the surreal nightmare into a cold procedural reality. The penthouse, once a symbol of Clara's elevated life, became a crime scene. Men in somber suits spoke in low, serious tones, their presence a violation of the home's sterile perfection. Clara sat on a plush sofa, a cashmere throw clutched in her hands, feeling as if she were watching a movie about someone else's life. Damien was a storm of controlled fury and wounded pride. He presented the narrative Isabella had so expertly crafted. He spoke of the necklace's immense sentimental value, his decision to let Clara wear it, and the shocking discovery of the replica in her personal studio. Every word was a nail in her coffin. Mr. Blackwood, did your wife have any financial troubles before you were married? One of the detectives, a man named Miller with weary eyes, asked. Before Damien could answer, Isabella interjected softly. Forgive me for speaking out of turn, detective, but I handle some of Damien's personal financial integrations. There were some significant student loans and a bit of credit card debt. Nothing unmanageable, of course, but... She let the sentence hang, pregnant with insinuation. Lies. Clara shot to her feet. My student loans were nearly paid off. I had no debt. Damien. Tell them. Damien wouldn't look at her. He simply gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod to the detective. There were some debts, he confirmed, his voice gravelly. I took care of them when we married. It was a truth twisted into a weapon. Yes, he had insisted on clearing her modest loans, a grand gesture of his wealth. But now, in this context, it painted her as a charity case, a woman with a history of needing money, a woman who might be tempted by a multi-million-dollar sapphire. The detectives questioned Clara. Her denials were passionate, her accusations against Isabella fervent. But to their trained, cynical ears, she sounded like every other cornered suspect. Her story was wild, a manipulative assistant framing the boss's wife out of jealousy. The alternative, a pregnant wife swapping a priceless heirloom for a fake, seemed simpler, more tangible. They had the replica found in her possession. They had a motive, however twisted. They had the word of Damien Blackwood. She was arrested. The quiet click of the handcuffs around her wrists was the loudest sound she had ever heard. They led her from her home past the priceless art and the panoramic views, her mind numb with disbelief. The final devastating blow was the look on Damien's face as she was escorted out. It wasn't just anger. It was a profound, soul-deep disappointment. He truly believed she had done it. The media descended like vultures. The story was irresistible. Blackwood's bride, a burglar. Billionaire's pregnant wife, charged in jewel heist. Her face was plastered everywhere, a grainy, unflattering photo from a college event. The narrative was set. She was a gold digger who got too greedy. Her only lifeline was her best friend, Chloe, a fiercely loyal elementary school teacher who stormed into the precinct like a hurricane. "This is insane, Clara. We're going to fight this. We'll get the best lawyer in the city," Chloe vowed, her hands gripping the bars of the holding cell. But Damien Blackwood had already retained the best lawyers for the prosecution. He was determined to see justice served for the desecration of his mother's memory. He spared no expense building a formidable legal wall that Clara, with her limited resources, could never hope to breach. Her court-appointed lawyer was competent, but overworked, facing a team of legal assassins funded by a billionaire's righteous fury. The trial was a public crucifixion. On the stand, Damien was a figure of tragic nobility. He spoke of his love for his mother, the significance of the necklace, and the ultimate betrayal by the woman he had trusted with his heart and home. His testimony was devastating, his pain palpable to the jury. Isabella's performance was even more brilliant. She played the role of the reluctant witness, the loyal employee forced to reveal a painful truth. She recounted finding the replica with feigned tears, her voice breaking, as she described Damien's heartbreak. She painted a picture of Clara as being secretive, often complaining about being financially dependent, and expressing a casual envy of the Blackwood family's legacy. They were small, insidious lies, impossible to disprove, and powerful in their cumulative effect. When Clara took the stand, her own story sounded flimsy and desperate in comparison. Her voice shook with a mixture of terror and rage. She tried to explain Isabella's campaign of subtle sabotage, the looks, the comments, the constant undermining. But without proof, her words sounded like the paranoid ramblings of a guilty woman trying to deflect blame. Mrs. Blackwood, the prosecuting attorney, said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Are you asking this jury to believe that Mr. Ricci, a trusted employee of 10 years, orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy, risked her entire career, and planted a fake necklace in your closet, all because she was... what? A little jealous? Yes, that's exactly what I'm asking." Clara insisted, her eyes pleading with the impassive faces of the jury. The prosecutor just smiled sadly, as if pitying her delusion. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Guilty. The judge's voice seemed to come from a great distance as he read the sentence. 5 to 7 years in the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for women. A strangled sob escaped Clara's throat. Her eyes flew to Damien. She searched his face for any flicker of doubt, any hint of the man she loved. She found nothing but a mask of cold, resolute duty. He had to believe this. To admit even the possibility of her innocence would be to admit his own monstrous failure, his gullibility, his catastrophic lack of judgment. It was easier to brand her a criminal than to face his own role in the tragedy. As the court officers led her away, she pressed a hand to her swollen belly. This was no longer just about her. They were sending her child to prison with her. She looked back one last time at the man who had been her husband, her partner, the father of her baby. He turned away, unable or unwilling to meet her gaze. The love story was over. The real sentence was just beginning. The transition from a penthouse in the sky to a 6-by-9-foot concrete cell was a brutal, soul-crushing amputation of self. Bedford Hills Correctional Facility was a world of grey concrete, clanging steel doors, and the pervasive scent of industrial cleaner, failing to mask the underlying odour of despair. The first few weeks were a blur of humiliating procedures, ill-fitting uniforms, and the constant oppressive noise of the institution. Clara's pregnancy, once a source of joy and anticipation, became her greatest vulnerability, and her only reason to survive. She was terrified. Every meal, every step, every interaction was filtered through the primal need to protect the life growing inside her. The other inmates regarded her with a mixture of pity and contempt. She was the billionaire's wife, a fallen princess whose story had been tabloid fodder. To them, she was a tourist in their world of generational poverty and systemic failure. Her salvation came in the unlikely form of Maria, a woman in her late 40s, serving a long sentence for armed robbery. Maria was tough with eyes that had seen everything, and a network of alliances that made her a quiet power on the cell block. She saw the raw terror in Clara's eyes, the hand that instinctively cradled her belly, and took her under her wing. "Stop looking so scared," Maria told her one day in the mess hall, her voice a low rasp. "Fear is blood in the water here. You're a mother now. Act like it." Maria taught her the unwritten rules, which guards to avoid how to trade. For who? For better food. How to make herself invisible. She taught Clara that survival in prison wasn't about being the strongest. It was about being the smartest and seeing the angles no one else did. For the first time since her arrest, Clara felt a flicker of agency. Meanwhile, in the outside world, Damien Blackwood was trying to erase her. He had Isabella orchestrate a quiet, swift divorce. He poured himself into his work with a renewed ferocity, launching new products and closing billion-dollar deals. He and Isabella were now a public power couple, her presence at his side, a constant fixture in financial news. She had moved into the penthouse, her clothes now filling the closet that had once been Clara's. She had everything she had ever wanted, but the victory felt strangely hollow to Damien. The penthouse was colder, the silence heavier. At night, he'd find himself walking past the sealed nursery, his hand hovering over the doorknob. Isabella would gently guide him away, her touch smooth and reassuring. "Don't torture yourself, darling," she'd murmur. "She wasn't the person you thought she was." He clung to those words like a mantra, a shield against the creeping tendrils of doubt. 7 months into her sentence, Clara went into labor. The experience was a primitive agony, a world away from the sanitized birthing suite she and Damien had planned. The prison infirmary was stark and cold, the staff indifferent. Maria stood guard outside the door, ensuring no one bothered her. Through the haze of pain, Clara focused on one thing, her son. Leo Hayes was born small but healthy, his first cries echoing in the sterile room. Holding him for the first time, Clara felt a love so fierce it eclipsed all the pain, all the injustice. His tiny fingers curled around hers. And in that moment, he was the only thing in the world that was real and true. The cruelty of her situation became starkly clear. She was allowed to keep him with her in the prison's nursery unit for only a short time. Every day was a precious, stolen gift. She memorized the shape of his ears, the scent of his skin, the way his eyes, so much like Damien's, blinked slowly in the dim light. The day she had to hand him over to Chloe was the day her heart truly broke. Chloe stood on the other side of a sterile visitation room divider, her face a mask of grief. "I'll take care of him, Clara. I swear it," Chloe sobbed, reaching for the baby. "I'll bring him to visit every week. He will know who his mother is." Giving Leo to her friend felt like tearing off a limb. As she watched them walk away, a part of Clara died. The fight went out of her, replaced by a dull, aching emptiness. She was just a number now, a ghost haunting a concrete box. Chloe was true to her word. She created a private social media page, accessible only to a few trusted family members, where she posted photos and updates about Leo. It was a way for Clara to watch her son grow from afar, through smuggled printouts that Maria would get for her. One evening, nearly a year after the trial, Damien found himself sleeplessly scrolling through a business contact's feed. A shared post caught his eye. It was from Chloe. He remembered her as Clara's fiery, loyal friend. The post was public, a rare slip-up on Chloe's part. It was a picture of a baby boy sitting in a high chair, a smear of sweet potato on his cheek. His eyes, those eyes laughing at the camera. The caption read, "My beautiful godson Leo, 1-year-old today. Your mama loves you more than all the stars in the sky, and she will be home soon." Damien froze. He zoomed in on the photo. The boy had his jawline, his dark hair, and the exact same shape of his eyes. This was his son, a son he had abandoned, a son who was growing up without a father whose mother was in prison because of him. He saw the comments below the post. One read, "He looks just like his mother, so strong." Another, "That Blackwood monster doesn't deserve to even know this angel exists." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. Monster. For the first time, the carefully constructed walls of his certainty began to crumble. He looked at the laughing baby in the photo and felt not the satisfaction of justice served, but a cold, creeping dread. The dread that he had been catastrophically wrong. The image of Leo laughing in his high chair became seared into Damien's mind. It haunted his days and invaded his dreams. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw the boy's eyes staring back at him. The word monster echoed in the silence of the penthouse. His impenetrable certainty had been the foundation of his actions. He had known Clara was guilty. He'd seen the evidence, heard the testimony, but the photo of his son chipped away at that foundation until hairline fractures of doubt spread through everything. What if he had been wrong? The magnitude of that possibility was so immense, so terrifying that he could barely breathe. He began his own quiet, obsessive investigation operating in the shadows of his own life. He couldn't alert Isabella. His suspicion was still just a phantom, and he knew she was too smart, too embedded in his life to risk tipping her off. He had to unravel the story himself, thread by painful thread. His first step was to revisit the narrative that had convicted Clara, her supposed financial desperation. He had blindly accepted Isabella's summary of Clara's significant debts. Now he bypassed his own company's accountants and hired an outside forensic accounting firm, giving them a simple directive. Find everything you can about Clara Hayes's finances for the 5 years prior to our marriage. While he waited for their report, he turned his attention to the penthouse security systems. He better than anyone knew their capabilities. He spent hours reviewing footage from the days surrounding the theft. On the surface, nothing was amiss. But Damien wasn't looking at the surface. He was looking for what wasn't there. He analyzed entry logs, motion sensor activity, and network access points. He found it late one night in the server room, a 5-minute data gap in the security log for the hallway leading to Clara's studio. It occurred at 2:17 a.m., 3 days before the necklace was reported missing. To any normal security review, it would look like a minor system glitch, a momentary reboot. But Damien knew his own system. It didn't glitch. A gap like that had to be manually created by someone with the highest level admin privileges. Only 2 people had that access, him and Isabella. A cold sweat broke out on his skin. He remembered being on a conference call with Tokyo that night. He had been in his office for hours. The report from the forensic accountants arrived the next day. It was a thin folder. The summary was stark. Clara Hayes had been the model of financial responsibility. She had 2 outstanding student loans, which she was paying down ahead of schedule through disciplined automated payments. Her credit card had a 0 balance. She had a modest but growing savings account. There was no desperation. There was no significant debt. There was only a woman carefully building a life for herself. Isabella's claims at the trial had been a complete fabrication, a lie, a deliberate, calculated lie. Damien felt the floor drop out from under him. He had built his empire on data, on facts, on seeing through deception, and he had been played for a fool by the person he trusted most. The image of Clara on the witness stand, her face streaked with tears, her voice raw as she pleaded with him to believe her, flashed in his mind. He had turned away. His focus narrowed to the replica necklace. In the storm of the investigation and trial, no one had bothered to trace its origin. It had simply been Exhibit A, the proof of Clara's deceit. Now it was the key. Using a proxy, he had the evidence file from the NYPD discreetly pulled for re-evaluation. He hired a private investigator, a former Mossad agent named Ari, whose specialty was tracing the untraceable. As Damien delved deeper, Isabella sensed the shift. He was distant, preoccupied. The easy intimacy they had cultivated since Clara's imprisonment had evaporated, replaced by a polite, formal chill. "Is everything all right, Damien?" she asked one evening, placing a hand on his shoulder as he stared out at the city lights. "You seem so far away." He forced a smile. "Just a lot on my mind, with the new merger. Long days." She accepted the lie, but her eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes, were watchful. She began to subtly reassert her control, anticipating his needs, managing his schedule with even more ruthless efficiency, leaving him no room to breathe, no room to think. She was reminding him of how indispensable she was. But it was too late. He was already pulling at the thread. Ari the investigator called a week later. "The replica is high-quality theatrical work," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "Not something you buy off the street. The materials are specific. I tracked the zirconia chips to a supplier who sells exclusively to a handful of artisans in the tri-state area. One of them is a man named Antoine Dubois, operating out of a small studio in Brooklyn. Specializes in period pieces for film and private commissions. He's a cash-only artist. No paper trail. Get me a meeting," Damien ordered, his heart pounding. 2 days later, Damien was sitting in a cluttered, dusty workshop that smelled of metal and polish. Antoine Dubois was a small, nervous man with ink-stained fingers. He was terrified of Damien Blackwood, but Ari's methods had been very persuasive. "I don't want trouble," Antoine stammered. "You won't have any provided you tell me the truth." Damien said, his voice calm and cold. "A little over a year and a half ago, you made a replica of this necklace." He slid a high-resolution photo of the Star of Astoria across the table. Antoine paled, nodding slowly. "Yes. I remember. A very specific job. The client was particular. Describe her." "I never saw her face clearly. She wore a large hat, sunglasses. Always. Paid in cash. But..." He paused, trying to recall the details. "She smelled of something. A perfume. Very distinctive. Tuberose, I think. And she wore a ring on her right index finger. A silver snake eating its own tail." Damien's blood ran cold. The Boros ring. Isabella had worn it every day for the past decade. It was a gift from her first mentor. She never took it off. He had her. The thread had been unraveled. Now all that was left to do was to watch the entire tapestry of lies come undone. The drive back to Manhattan was a blur. The confirmation of Isabella's guilt didn't bring Damien relief, only a sickening, hollow certainty. He wasn't just a fool, he was an accessory. His arrogance and his wounded pride had been the weapons Isabella used to destroy Clara. He had handed them to her willingly. He spent the next 48 hours constructing a trap. He moved with the cold, predatory precision he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. He had Ari install discreet, high-fidelity audio and video recorders in his study, the same room where Clara's life had been dismantled. He instructed his legal team to prepare 2 sets of documents. One a severance package for Isabella of unprecedented generosity, and the other a comprehensive file detailing the evidence against her to be delivered to the district attorney's office. The final piece of his plan was the bait. He called Isabella into the study on a Friday evening. "Close the door," he said, his tone casual. "There's something important I need to discuss with you." She entered, smiling, the ever-efficient partner, ready to solve a problem. She was wearing the Ouroboros ring. The faint floral scent of tuberose perfume trailed behind her. "I've received an extraordinary offer for another one of my mother's pieces." He began gesturing to a velvet box on his desk. "This emerald suite. The offer is almost too good to be true. Before I proceed, I need to have it independently verified and a replica made for the insurance records. The process is a bit unorthodox. It requires absolute discretion." He watched her face. For a fraction of a second, her professional mask slipped. A flicker of avarice of calculation crossed her features before being smoothed away. "Of course," she said. "I can handle that for you. I know just the person. Discreet works off book." "Excellent," Damien said, leaning back in his chair. "Cash only, I assume." "Like Antoine Dubois." The name hit her like a physical shock. Her smile froze. The color drained from her face. I don't know who that is." "Don't you?" Damien's voice dropped, losing all its warmth. "He's an artisan in Brooklyn. He remembers you. He remembers the hat, the sunglasses. He remembers the smell of tuberose." Damien leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers, "and he remembers the ring." Isabella instinctively tucked her right hand behind her back. "This is ridiculous." "Damien, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about a 5-minute data gap in my security logs. I'm talking about a forensic accounting report that shows Clara had no debt. I'm talking about perjury, Isabella. I'm talking about fabricating evidence. I'm talking about you sending an innocent pregnant woman to prison." She stared at him, her mind racing, searching for an escape route. She tried tears first. Damien, how can you even think this? After everything I've done for you, for this company. She twisted your mind against me. She was always jealous of our relationship. Stop, he commanded, his voice like cracking ice. The performance is over. The cameras are rolling. He gestured to a nearly invisible lens in a bookshelf. Her tears vanished, replaced by a cold fury. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered, revealing the years of bitterness and resentment beneath. You want a confession? She hissed, her voice low and venomous. Fine. Yes, I did it. Every last bit of it. She stood up, pacing the room like a chained animal, her confession pouring out in a torrent of rage. I gave you 10 years of my life. I was there for every deal, every crisis, every all-nighter. I built this empire with you. I was your partner in everything but name. And what was my reward? To stand by and watch you give it all away to some doe-eyed little architect who didn't have a clue what it meant to be a Blackwood. Her voice dripped with contempt. She was weak. She didn't deserve you. She didn't deserve this life. I deserved it. I earned it. The necklace, Damien asked, his voice hollow. Pathetically easy, she scoffed. I had the replica made weeks in advance, swapped them out the night of the gala when you were both distracted. I knew your security protocols better than your own guards. Planting it in her studio was child's play. And you were so blinded by your precious mother's memory and your own arrogance you believed every word. You wanted to believe it. It was easier than admitting you'd married beneath you. The cruelty of her words was breathtaking. She had seen his weakness, his pride, and used it as a lever to orchestrate the entire tragedy. Where is the real one? He demanded. She laughed a harsh, ugly sound. It's my severance package, my retirement plan, hidden away where you'll never find it. Damien didn't move. He just stared at the woman he thought he knew, a stranger filled with a poison he had never seen. You won't need a retirement plan where you're going, Isabella. He pressed a button on his intercom. Frank, please come in, and bring the gentleman with you. The study door opened. 2 NYPD detectives, the same Detective Miller from the initial investigation, and his partner stepped inside. Miller's face was grim. He had read the file Damien's lawyers had prepared. Isabella's face went white with genuine shock. She looked from the detectives to Damien, a final desperate plea in her eyes. Damien met her gaze, his own expression devoid of any emotion, but a vast, empty regret. It's over. As they read Isabella her rights and cuffed her, the full crushing weight of his failure descended upon him. This confession wasn't a victory. It was a testament to his own monumental blindness. He hadn't just been wrong. He had been a monster. And his confession, the one that truly mattered, was still to come. And it would be far, far too late. The arrest of Isabella Ricci ignited a media firestorm that dwarfed the original scandal. The headlines were brutal Blackwood's empire of lies. Mistress admits to framing pregnant wife. In the new narrative, Damien was no longer the tragic wronged husband. He was recast as a gullible fool, at best a cruel accomplice at worst. Blackwood Industries' stock price plummeted as the market reacted to the instability and moral rot at the company's core. For Damien, the public humiliation was nothing compared to the private agony. He was haunted by the knowledge that every clang of a prison door, every lonely night Clara had spent in a cell, every terrified moment of her prison birth was his fault. He had not only allowed it to happen, he had powered it with his wealth and his rage. His lawyers, a new team specializing in wrongful convictions, moved swiftly. With Isabella's full confession, the evidence of her conspiracy, and Damien's own sworn affidavit admitting his catastrophic error, the legal path to exonerating Clara was clear, though fraught with bureaucratic inertia. In Bedford Hills, the news arrived on a smuggled copy of the New York Post that Maria slid under Clara's cell door. Clara stared at the headline, at the picture of Isabella in handcuffs, her face a mask of defiant fury. She felt nothing. There was no surge of triumphant joy, no satisfying thirst for vengeance quenched. There was only a profound hollow exhaustion, as if she had been holding her breath for 2 years and could finally let it go. Freedom was coming. But what did freedom even mean anymore? It couldn't give her back her son's first words, his first steps. It couldn't erase the memory of giving birth on a cold infirmary table or the phantom weight of handcuffs on her wrists. The truth had come out, but it was a truth scarred and damaged, arriving long after the lie had done its work. Damien, desperate and broken, attempted to visit her. He needed to see her, to apologize, to beg for a forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. The request came back, stamped with a single damning word: refused. Days later, the final orders came through. Clara Hayes was officially exonerated of all charges. Her conviction was vacated. She was a free woman. The release process was quiet and surreal. She walked through the same gates she had entered 2 years prior, trading her grey prison uniform for simple clothes Chloe had brought her. The world seemed too loud, too bright, too fast. As she stepped into the sunlight, she saw a media circus held back by barricades. And she saw him. Damien was standing by a black town car, looking gaunt and older. His eyes, desperate and pleading, found hers across the pavement. He took a hesitant step toward her, but Chloe moved between them, a fierce and protective barrier. "Not today, Damien," Chloe said, her voice trembling with rage. "Not ever, if I have my way." Clara didn't even look at him. Her gaze was fixed on Chloe's car, on the child seat in the back. She got in without a word, and Chloe drove away, leaving Damien standing alone on the pavement, a ghost at a reunion he was not invited to. Their first stop was Chloe's small, warm apartment in Queens. The moment Clara walked through the door, a small boy with dark, curly hair and familiar eyes toddled toward them, looking at her with a stranger's curiosity. "Leo, Chloe," whispered her voice, thick with tears. "Mama's home." Clara sank to her knees, her arms outstretched. Leo hesitated, glancing back at Chloe, his anchor for reassurance. Clara's heart broke and swelled at the same time. She was a stranger to her own son. She didn't rush him. She just waited, her face wet with silent tears. Finally, driven by a toddler's curiosity, Leo took a few wobbly steps forward and placed a tiny hand on her cheek. "Mama," he whispered, testing the word. "Yes, baby," Clara sobbed, pulling him into a gentle embrace, breathing in the sweet scent of her child for the first time as a free woman. "Mama's here." She held him, rocking back and forth on the floor of her friend's apartment, the gaping wounds of the last 2 years beginning finally to feel the first touch of healing. She was free. She had her son. But the reckoning was yet to come. Life after prison was a fragile, disorienting piece. Clara and Leo moved into a quiet brownstone in Brooklyn, paid for by a victims' compensation fund the state had awarded her. Every day was a process of rediscovery. She learned the rhythm of her son's life, his favorite books, his hatred of peas, the way he giggled when she tickled him. She was rebuilding her life from the ashes, but the ghosts of her past were never far. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, the metallic clang of a cell door echoing in her ears. Damien, true to his word, began his campaign of atonement. It started with a formal offer delivered by his lawyers, a settlement of $50 million, the penthouse, any property she desired, and a public apology he would read from the steps of his company headquarters. Clara's response was swift. She sent back the legal documents with a single sentence written across the front in red ink. "My life is not for sale." She knew, however, that she couldn't cut him out completely. He was Leo's father. For the sake of her son, she finally agreed to meet him. Not in a lawyer's office or a fancy restaurant, but on neutral ground, a quiet bench in Prospect Park. He arrived looking like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. The titan of industry was gone, replaced by a shell of a man consumed by a guilt that was etched into every line on his face. "Clara," he began, his voice raspy. "Thank you for seeing me. I'm not here for you, Damien." She cut him off, her voice steady and devoid of the fire he'd expected. It was colder and far more devastating. "I'm here for my son. He will one day ask about his father, and I need to be able to tell him that I gave his father a chance to explain why he sent his mother to prison." The words, delivered so calmly, struck him harder than any slap. "There is no explanation," he whispered, his eyes on the ground. "Only a confession. I was arrogant. I was proud. When I thought you betrayed me, betrayed my mother's memory, my grief and my ego made me blind. Isabella showed me what I wanted to see, and I was too much of a coward to look any deeper. I failed you. In every way, a man can fail a woman. I am so sorry." She listened, her expression unreadable. "Sorry doesn't give me back the 2 years I lost. It doesn't give Leo back his mother for the first year of his life." "You talk about your mother's memory, Damien. What about the memory you created for your own son?" "His first memories of his mother are in a prison visitation room. That's your legacy." Tears streamed down his face, hot and shameful. "I know. God, I know. What can I do? Tell me what to do." "You want to atone?" she asked, finally looking at him. "Then be a father. That's all. You can see Leo on Saturdays. You will pay for his education. You will never, ever speak ill of me to him. You will answer his questions honestly when he is old enough to ask them. You will live with what you've done every single day, just like I have to. That is your penance." He nodded, accepting her terms as if they were a lifeline. And as he asked the question, a faint, hopeful whisper. Clara gave a sad, weary shake of her head. "There is no us. You can't rebuild a home after you've burned it to the ground. I loved you, Damien, but the man I loved wouldn't have let this happen. Isabella was just a snake. But you opened the door and let her in. You held me down while she bit." She stood up, her time with him concluded. "Goodbye, Damien." She walked away, leaving him alone on the park bench, a billionaire with all the money in the world and nothing left to buy. The final scene of the story isn't one of revenge, but of quiet resilience. Months later, Clara stands in a small, bright office, a blueprint for a community library, spread out on her desk. She has started her own small architectural firm, focusing on public projects. Leo plays with blocks on the floor nearby. Her life is not gilded anymore. It is real, built with her own 2 hands. She is a survivor, her strength forged in fire. Damien fulfills his role, a weekend father, living in a silent penthouse haunted by ghosts. Isabella received a lengthy prison sentence, and the star of Astoria, recovered from a Swiss vault, now sits in the darkness of a museum archive, a tainted symbol of a love and a trust that were shattered beyond repair. Clara Hayes had lost a fortune, but in the end, she had reclaimed something far more valuable herself. Clara's story is a harrowing reminder that the deepest betrayals often come from those we love the most. She lost everything, but she never lost herself. Her fight for the truth and her journey to reclaim her life and her son is a testament to the strength of a mother's love and the resilience of the human spirit. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and share it with someone you know. These stories of injustice and survival deserve to be heard. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next real-life drama. What did you think of Damien's choice? Let us know in the comments below.